Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Alyssa Snurker, and we're thrilled to have you here at our Businesses at Work event, marking the launch of our 4th annual report. For those of you who aren't familiar, the Businesses at Work report provides an in-depth view into how organizations and people are working today. Because Okta sits at the intersection of millions of users accessing thousands of applications, we're in a pretty unique position to be able to see some interesting data and trends. Over the past few years, we've always taken a look at what apps are most popular or fastest growing. And this year, we also saw that collaboration is becoming increasingly important across the enterprise. Cisco, Spark, Facebook Workplace, and Slack all saw impressive growth over the past year. We also took a look at how the modern worker is using different applications, and specifically how they're using travel applications like Southwest and United, and PayPal as their top finance application. And of course, we all know that security is top of mind, so we did some deeper analysis this year around the threat intelligence landscape, top applications, and information around MFA and password policies. So we've got a great lineup today for you at the event. We have 3 different conversations lined up. First, we're gonna have a CEO and CIO conversation. Then we'll have a broader panel around the Businesses at Work findings. And we'll finish up the day with a security fireside chat. So it's my pleasure to introduce our first session. We thought there's no better way to introduce the section than by having a CEO who's actually using and deploying, a CIO, who's actually using and deploying these applications, and the CEOs of Okta and Box to join the conversation. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to CIO of Workday, Diana McKenzie, CEO of Box, Aaron Levy, and CEO of Okta, Todd McKinnon, who will be joined by Miguel Helft from Forbes to lead the discussion. Thank you.
Okay. Don't take the moderator seat. I thought that was the first rule, is you can always take the moderator seat now.
All right, so one of the things we saw in this report, the average number of apps being used by enterprises is growing. And there are so many, for those of us in the media, it's hard to wrap our heads around everything that's going on. I'm sure it's the same for, for a CIO. Do you get to a point where there's saturation, there's too many apps, and like, how do you choose?
That's a great question. I don't know that there's ever going to be a point of saturation. It's hard to predict. I do think we see a lot of recycling, if you will. You know, as AI and natural language interfaces come into the space technologically, we have the opportunity to advance the apps that we're using, and maybe some of the ones that were popular before start to fade into the rearview mirror. How we choose really has a lot to do with what works best with our workforce inside, or what we think is going to be best in terms of meeting the needs of what our business is trying to accomplish. And as a CIO, our focus maybe moves a bit away from the app itself and more towards how we're going to architect the environment from an API standpoint. So as we bring those apps in, we know we can secure the data, and we know we can take advantage of the data, put it to good work to help us continue to compete.
What do you guys think about the saturation point?
It's funny, you know, I've lost.
Well, Todd loves it. So.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the work of business model.
Well, it's funny, yeah, well, you know, self-serving. The report would be a little boring if there was one app. Top trending app is the one app. Yeah. But in all seriousness, you do meet, most customers I meet have, obviously their environments are like at Workday, like Diana's, they're very heterogeneous and very mixed, and the challenges are bringing that together in one universal experience for the end user and for administrators. But investors I've talked to over last year, it's interesting. You get some investors that are very, see the world like we do, and it's heterogeneity, and the more the better, and it's about bringing this thing into one bunch of different apps into one logical kind of workspace. But you get some investors that they really believe in this idea of, you know, monolithic stacks, and it's a little bit shocking, right? They're like, yeah, it's going to consolidate. You're going to have just a couple vendors, and so we have to convince them of all the reasons why we think that that's wrong. And I think that there are a couple core ones that we can chat about here, but I think the biggest core reason why that's wrong is because what's very different in this age is that the connection between the technology and the end user is incredibly strong, and it doesn't go through IT. It doesn't go through other gatekeepers that made consolidation more, you know, possible in the past. that direct connection to end user means there's a diverse appetite for different functionalities and different, like you were saying, Diana, capabilities, and that's what we're seeing in this ecosystem of vendors that are taking advantage of that.
Aaron, other than consolidation around box, what do you see on that?
Yeah, I mean, that's our preferred approach. But I think, it's been interesting. When we first started, our job was I apologize, but it was just like infiltrate the enterprise and try and make life hell for the CIO and just get as many users as humanly possible within the organization. And then we realized, maybe we need to like slow down and think about this a little bit more strategically. And because ultimately Diana has to have an architecture that makes sense from an API standpoint, from integrations, and we're seeing that there's always been this tension between the best of breed approach where what you get is constant innovation from a variety of players, so you're really getting the benefits of a broader market where maybe 10, 20, 30, 50 different companies are all competing for innovating for Diana's environment, or you buy from 2 or 3 or 5 vendors, and maybe it's a little bit, maybe on the surface, it looks a little bit cheaper. Maybe on the surface, it looks like there's more integration because it's all coming from one vendor. But ultimately, what we've seen over time is that one vendor ends up taking advantage of you. They end up charging more over time. They end up actually slowing down their innovation. And so we kind of know that the marketplace model works. And I think we're finding like what is the right ultimate kind of terminal point of how many apps is the right amount. And some companies, you'll go into their environment and they'll have 2,000 applications that are being used, and it's just impossible to secure. It's impossible to have any standardization. People can't get their work done. And then you go into some organizations and there's only 2 or 3 sort of primary workplace tools, and then you'll talk to employees and they say, we're not being enabled by IT. We're not actually getting the technology we need. So I think there's always this balance that you have to find around how do you get decentralized decision-making from and empower people, and also how do you get a certain amount of consistency and standardization that actually makes it effective to run an IT organization. And we like to find what is that right balance, and we certainly, most of our customers are those that choose to have a more best of breed approach, and our job is just to sit amidst that ecosystem.
Diana, a question for you. So roughly how many enterprise apps do you use? And then when you're thinking about what next, what am I going to implement? There's some things that are meeting certain business needs, some things that are going to drive growth. I mean, is that how you think about it? How do you prioritize, okay, we're going to do this next?
So I can't tell you off the top of my head how many apps we use. In the enterprise, there's a core set that we use that run the entire business. But then, as Todd and Aaron both said, we have lots of apps in the enterprise. And so back to the point of the API is critically important. How we prioritize, we think about our business to the customer frame, and that's a revenue generating model, or that's a customer satisfaction model when we think about our paying customers. And what's the right platform for us to have to reach those customers? We clearly have our own platform that we run. It's an important enterprise platform within Workday. And then when we think about our internal employee population, that is a critical stakeholder community for us to reach. And so we also think about when we bring in applications that are going to make it easier for people to get their work done, how do we, from more of a best of breed perspective as opposed to a one size fits all, how are we going to meet that need by bringing together the right set of applications? And prioritization takes the frame of, what's going to help with revenue, what's going to drive scale, and what's going to create the best employee experience.
Let me switch gears a little bit and ask about AI, which is the big buzzy thing that everybody's talking about, including in the enterprise. As a vendor, as a maker of software, what opportunities do you see in AI, both as disrupting, entering new markets, and also sort of defensively, well, somebody could use machine learning in some way to get into my business or steal my customers away? How do you see it?
Yeah, I think it's a huge trend. It's a little bit well, it was the biggest overhyped thing, and then cryptocurrency took that throne away from it. So it's a battle for what's the most overhyped.
Do you have a coin yet?
Exactly. We're thinking about it.
Okay. Oh no.
That event's next week. Okay. We'll see you all back here. No, but if you look at AI, machine learning, I think why is that? It is a very important trend. It's a hugely there's tons of potential and has huge impact. But if you look at why, like what's different over the last few years, why is it happening? Why is it kind of getting so prominent? There's a couple things. One is, compute power has gotten better, and the algorithms have also gotten better, and there's been some pretty important research done. But the big difference is that the amount of data that these companies have to run the algorithms on is really unprecedented. Right? There's a reason why Google drives around 15,000 miles of autonomous cars every day. It's not like a billboard scheme, right? It's to gather data. And so when we look at AI and machine learning at Okta, our strategy basically is make our customers successful, get more customers, get more users, get more data, and then that's a very strong foundation to build great products off of and that can provide more value to our users over time using AI technologies.
I'd be actually curious on the product side from Workday standpoint how you see it, but at least from our perspective, playing in the space of helping people be able to collaborate and share and manage their information, what's been interesting is in the specific category that we play in for 20 or 30 years that there's been software that helps companies manage and store and collaborate around files or content, all of the software has been dumb. So all the software can only literally do what you tell it to do. So I put a file here, I put a piece of information here, and I tell other people to come get it. And all we're doing is brokering one set of people to another and managing and being custodian of the data in the process, securing it, adding workflow around it, making it really easy to access. But we know, based on the behavior, based on the patterns, based on how people are using this data, there's probably 100x improvement in what we could do to help the end users of these applications become more productive. So once we know that 9 times out of 10 at 9 in the morning, you tend to look at certain reports, well, then we should start serving up those reports to you automatically and predicting that you're going to want to look at that report every morning. Before you go into a meeting, if you're connected into your calendar, we know the meeting that you're going into and thus maybe what supporting materials you're going to want to be looking at. Or maybe there was a lot of work done on a project the night before. Can we actually distill that work down and be able to present it back to you when you log in again in the morning to see what's been happening? And so we're used to this in the consumer world quite a bit at this point, but enterprise software just traditionally has not been doing intelligent things or smart things, connecting the dots between all the different data and pattern that we have to be able to make the experience for an end user much more powerful.
So is it fair to say that we are very early on in the adoption curve when it comes to AI in enterprise?
Yeah, I think we're like 3 weeks in right now.
3 weeks in.
This is like everybody's 2018 roadmap. So but we've been talking about it for probably 2 or 3 years. I think it finally got on people's roadmap maybe about a year or two ago. And I think we'll start to see the manifestation within our enterprise software over the next couple of years.
So any of you give me a very specific sense of like something, you just talk sort of generally getting these files here and there. And like, what's the best application of AI in the enterprise that you've seen that either among your customers or you just see out there? How is it changing how we work?
Well, I have very biased ones that I can just share again. But the 2 biggest ones that we're working on that will be, we believe, out this year. One is again, making end users more productive. So we announced a new product, effectively a news feed. And fortunately, nowadays, talking about news feeds is not a positive thing. So, but just imagine 5 years ago, it was really exciting. So before it changed elections and everything. But at this point, what we want to do is give you basically a feed of what's happening around your work and how are people getting work done. And so being able to present all the different updated information in an intelligent way when you log into Box. So that's something that we announced last year that will be coming out this year. And then one more is security. The only way that we believe you're going to be able to keep your enterprise secure in the future is by taking all the different events happening across the entire enterprise and be able to create more predictive experiences for, hey, why is that person accessing a file that they've never loaded before on a device that we've never seen before? So those are the kinds of things that we'll be at least delivering within Box and hopefully changing how people work with their information because of that. But I'm sure you folks are doing some pretty cool stuff also.
Yeah, I would say within Workday proper, for our customers who use our human capital management platform, there is the opportunity to understand what the risk of high-value employee leaving the company early might be. And that's based on a variety of factors that are all built into that algorithm. And we can, in our scorecard, actually see where we think that risk is showing up.
So what's a risk factor?
Oh, well, if I told you, I'd have to shoot you.
I just quit my
It's part of the
job, so
algorithm,
you know,
yeah,
I don't.
so
Exactly.
you think, oh, well, there you go. You know, you think about, how often are employees using their vacation, right? How
Yeah.
engaged in
Okay.
the community are they? Do they have, we have mentoring relationships set up? Do they have goals in the system? There's a variety of factors that you can look at to say this employee's engaged or they aren't. I would say if I build on where Todd and Aaron are playing, and I think about how we want to engage employees and better understand the environment they're operating in, both of the concepts that they placed out there. If I know which apps my folks are accessing, and I know what content they're trying to get at, and I understand what they're searching for and how to make them work far more productively, there's a holy grail in all of that. So I would love to see these two companies continue to do what they're doing.
Yeah, for us, it's security. We found
Security is the killer app for AI.
Yeah, and it's, especially where we sit, it's being able to, it's one thing to, see when someone's tried to change their password too many times and gets locked out. It's a whole nother thing to be able to predict which accesses that are successful are actually fraudulent. Right, it's almost like it's been called fraud detection, right? And credit card companies have been focused on it for years. But when we think about AI and machine learning in the near term, it's all about how do we apply it to that security use case and take our data and make it much better for customers and much more secure overall.
Okay, let me switch gears again. Culture has become has taken outsized importance in Silicon Valley. Where do you think we are in terms of everybody is well-meaning and wants to do the right thing, wants to be more diverse and more inclusive, and we're not that successful. Where are we, and what can we do better?
Yeah, we can do a ton better. I think for at least for the life of so I'm in Silicon Valley now 11 or 12 years, and I think when you're first sort of starting your company, in a lot of cases, and this is not true of every organization, I think you think of culture as, you got a ping pong table and you get a bunch of people into a room and everybody's going to be friends and that's culture, and that's the environment you're trying to create. And as you scale over time, you realize that's sort of superficially culture, and that culture is the environment you build where people can feel like they can work with one another. It's building a workplace where people can do their best work, where you have, in an ideal case, a diverse set of people and perspectives attacking problems, and that actually takes a lot more work, and that you can't really solve superficially by just getting your friends in a room and a ping pong table. And so and I think we've seen the extent of when cultures go awry because they don't think about it in a much more disciplined type of way, and especially as you get as you scale, it gets harder and harder. So this is I think going to be the fundamental issue of the Valley for the next few years is what types of cultures can survive and sustain, and which ones fall apart because they haven't been set up for success, and they haven't been set up for all of the things that I think you need to start to care about. So pretty critical set of issues, and interestingly, I think technology does intersect with some of this, because the type of transparency you provide, the kind of environments that you create, this is going to be driven by a combination of what are you doing from a tech standpoint, what are you doing from a people or HR standpoint, what are you doing from a leadership standpoint within the organization, how are you changing hiring practices. All of this is going to have to come together to be able to support the kind of cultures I think we know we need to create.
So.
I'm sure what you were going to say was much better.
I don't know about that. Well, I was going to build on Aaron said. So, at Workday, when I started a couple of years ago, I was probably on board 3 or 4 months, and Anil came into one of our senior management team meetings, pulled up the scorecard in Workday, and showed us where he saw some disturbing trends in our attrition with some of our newer hires. So we double clicked on that, and within the next year, we'd taken every single one of our managers, the entire company, through 2 days of required mandatory, here's how to be a good manager training. And that training was put on by the members of the senior management team. So it just drove this notion of we're investing in the culture, we want to build trust. And as part of the training effort, every manager got a 360 survey from their direct reports. We've since now deployed a new, every Friday, 2 questions. Every employee in the company gets 2 questions in Workday that they answer about how effective their manager is managing. And that same set of questions gets rotated 3 times a year. And I, as the manager, get to see how I'm affecting my employees. My manager gets to see how my employees are rating me as a manager. And it's driving this culture of trust. It really is improving across the board our engagement scores with the workforce. And then I'm just going to build in diversity here as well. I think one of the other things that we're seeing positively within the community that I'm a part of is when we break with the senior management team at Workday, there is a line in the women's restroom. Right. So we have like 9 or 10 people, women on the senior management team.
Oh, that's good. Thank you. I'm glad about that. That's good.
Oh, it's not on our scorecard, but it's a nice way to measure.
Yeah. This is
That's one KPI to
add that one to the scorecard. This is super important, and I think I think the comments that Aaron and Diana said were right on. I would add at a higher level, I think that there's 2 things that are so. I don't think any founder, any company starts, I trust they're not bad people, right? They're trying to do the right thing. They're trying to build their company. And the problem has been that the companies that were successful for whatever reason, whether it's good timing in a market or really big innovation, get really successful. And then the culture, the power of that success of that company is so important to the press and to the whole, the money generated and the whole culture at large. The Apples, the Googles, the Facebook, the Amazons, that culture can kind of run amok because the impact and the success of the company is what the culture, the society is valuing. So I think a couple of things have changed recently. One thing is that tech is evolving from being, the upstarts, the generator of riches, to being such an important force in the world that people are worried about what it could do. So the tone of just success at all costs is changing. That's one important difference. And the other important difference is that people are just seeing that it's not enough just to be a successful company, but you can't have a bunch of a-holes, right? You got to have a good group of people and a good culture. And that expectation in society, along with just this, I think, change in the sentiment of success of a company at all costs, and that's the end all be all thing, will give us as leaders more kind of opportunity to emphasize culture and make sure that's a value thing. Because I'm sure that Diana and Aaron would echo this. When you're building a company, it's, sometimes doing the right, this is not a popular thing to say, but sometimes doing the right thing culturally is hard. You have someone that's behaving maybe not the greatest exemplary behavior, but they're a superstar. It's hard to discipline them or hard to fire them. And, I'm not saying we don't do it, but it's hard not to do. So I think this emphasis on culture and people and not success of the company at all costs is helpful and will be, as leaders in the company, will give us more of a kind of permission, so to speak, to do that, which I think is powerful.
I'd love to go deeper on this, but we're flat out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that panel. It's interesting to hear about the importance of course, personalization and the opportunity that technology has across the enterprise and across the world really as well. So for our next section, we're going to be hearing not only from customer using the technology, but also from the leaders of the companies who are building the applications that are fighting to be at the top of the businesses at work report. So I'm pleased to introduce our next panel. We'll be inviting back up Miguel to lead this discussion, and we're going to have Jennifer Tejada, CEO of PagerDuty. We have Frederick Harris, COO and co-founder of Okta. We also have our team. We have, Dean Hager from Jamf, and we are also joined by Alan Leinwand, CTO of ServiceNow. So please join me in welcoming this panel.
So we have this report. Welcome. We have this report.
Thanks for having us, Miguel.
Yeah.
You threw a great party.
It's my show. Yeah.
It is.
We have this report in Business at Work. Showed the growth, adoption. Did anything stand out in the data in terms of what's been growing fastest, what's at the top of the heap, and what's not?
My observations were actually called out pretty clear in the report that, collaboration apps, security apps, but security in a different way than what yesteryear used to provide, seemed to jump out more than anything in terms of the fastest growing and the heaviest use.
We're like the fastest growing enterprise software company north of $1 billion. So the fact that we stood out was a good thing. I was surprised and pleased to see that. I also like to see the fact that security, and you talked in the last panel about ML and AI, the ability to realize that people feel that security is something that they need to pay attention to. Security before was always the Department of IT or the Department of the CISO. It wasn't the Department of the boardroom. And being able to actually have that conversation, so you don't have to explain to a board member what a phishing attack is. You don't have to explain why single sign-on is important. You don't have to explain to them about why having identity protection is something that's really critical for the enterprise. Was something that sort of stood out for me is something that's finally becoming forefront of people's minds. People read about these attacks and they just kind of roll their eyes and say, hopefully it doesn't happen to me. But now they realize that it's personal and they need to take serious precautions inside the enterprise, because if they don't, it'll be a bad day.
I also think the report reflects the consumerization of enterprise, that employees are empowered to make choices about the tools that they use, the applications they use, the quality of the experience that they gain from those applications. And so you're seeing a broader mix as opposed to just traditional enterprise software making its way to the top of the stack rank.
Yeah, the power of the user's voice has never been so loud and clear as it is today. Back in the day, securing the enterprise meant keeping people out of your network and keeping your employees from doing things the slightest bit interesting. And today, the user wants to use the devices that they want. They want the data available on all of those devices. They want choice, they want flexibility, they want access, they want mobility, they want privacy, and they want to be able to use it both personally and at work. Secure that. That is a very different world of security than it was 10 years ago.
Is security as an application? I mean, that's not something consumers say, I want to be, I want to secure, I want this app because it's going to give more security. That's the job of IT. And so it's sort of a result of consumerization, the fact that security becomes so important.
Well, I would say that's also a reflection of consumers are now asking for that in their lives at home. I mean, for example, I will not use any bank that doesn't have two-factor authentication.
Yeah.
Just basic principle.
Yeah.
So I think that when you start to have that expectation in consumers' lives, when they go to work, they would say, well, why would this be any less secure? But one thing that I would just add to your previous question is, I also think the pervasiveness of all the industries. So I think if you were talking about enterprise software 20 years ago, you would look and say, okay, well, obviously in a lot of technology companies, they use a lot of software, maybe in a lot of services companies, but now you really see that every company has to become a technology company, and it's indicated in that report. It's not just all these different industries that are up here or specific applications, but it's across all the different industries. It's insurance, it's media, obviously, it's technology manufacturing services, and you start to get into all these broad industries that are saying, we need to use all this modern technology as well. And I think that's where it becomes very, very interesting, not only in terms of obviously building a lot of interesting software that companies can use, but I think it's helping a lot of these companies and these industries move forward. I think you're seeing a lot more innovation in manufacturing, in insurance because of technology. And I think that's one of the most interesting things that I've seen when I go out and I talk to customers.
There's a tech stack for every worker. There's a fintech stack, there's a MarTech stack. Like, no matter where you work in a business, you now have a stack of applications supporting you and doing your job, automating, previously menial tasks, right? But also in some cases disintermediating you from information that's important. And a lot of those tech stacks were built for a world that was designed around a command and control model. And since then, we've democratized computing. Companies operate like ecosystems. We're deploying power and decision-making to the front line of our businesses, to developers, et cetera. And so consumers and employees are demanding better experiences from their apps. They're demanding information in real time. They're not going to wait for a prescriptive process to get them the information that they need, or a linear process. And I think that's one of the biggest changes that we have to recognize. It's not just the way our applications work together, in the organism that, a CIO like Diane has to manage. It's also, what's the expectation of any talented employee coming into your business or living in your business in terms of what they want from that tech stack, what they need to do their best work in your company. So it has impact on culture, on performance, on customer service. And I think we need to think differently about how the workforce has changed, ramp them up with the skills that they need, and then help them understand how to leverage that technology effectively to be successful.
No, I think that's a good point, but I'll be a little contrarian. Hasn't it always been the case? We always have tech stacks. I mean, go back 20 years and yeah, there was an IT tech stack and there was a finance tech stack and there was a marketing tech stack. It's always been there. What's changed now is that we've gone past 1996. The reason I picked 1996 is that's when Outlook came out, right? So we all lived in email, and now we're finally at a spot where applications are becoming more consumerized. The enterprise needs to drive workflows better and faster. And yes, we still have these different fintech stacks. I mean, there's always been a finance stack. It's been SAP or Oracle. Pick your favorite one. We just now have a different one. So how do we think about making those experiences, I agree with you, better? But I think it's kind of little not correct to say that, oh, now there's tech and we have to make it better.
Well, the difference is the employee can choose the tech stack now. Like they don't have to wait for the CIO or program manager, or like you swipe a credit card, you try it, you go. You know, kids don't read movie reviews now, they watch trailers, right? They want to experience it first, see if it has an impact, and then go. And I think that that's one of the things that's changing the speed in which the employee, experience changes. They can choose their own tools, and the network effect, if teams then choose tools, means the company doesn't have control necessarily over the tool set. That popularity happens on its own, as opposed to the old days where the CIO decided, dropped something in, and everybody was mandated to use it.
I would also say the user interfaces have just gotten a lot
Critically
better,
important.
because everyone expects when they come here this morning, whether they took Uber or Lyft or something else, it was an app. They pulled it up on their phone, they pressed the button, they got in. If you think about Box, or you think about Workday, you think about what that was 20 years ago, first of all, not every employee in the company used Workday, certainly to get manager feedback. There was no manager feedback 20 years ago. Secondly, that interface was something that you literally needed a manual to be able to understand. Whereas now it's like, if I can't use it on my phone without clicking the help button, that application is going to go away. So while I think those tech stacks have always been there, I think that there's been a big difference in terms of everyone in the company now is using a lot more of these applications, and the interfaces have to be that much better because, by the way, the new generation of employee that's coming in, they're expecting that. And I literally see people walking around my office interviewing, and they're looking at what is the technology that's sitting on the desk. And I guarantee you, if it's a desktop that looks like something from 1996, we are probably not going to get that applicant, right? And that's a big deal. Not that 1996 computers were not cool.
Yeah.
I'm just saying they were very cool.
They're retro. How much do you design your product, your marketing, your go-to-market approach for that employee who's going to swipe the credit card and try your product?
I mean, I think enterprise software, if it hasn't already, our product was built with a consumer use case in mind. We sold it directly to an individual that was solving a painful problem. If you've been a developer and engineer in any business in the last 15 years, you've been called when something breaks in the middle of your wedding, in the middle of the night, on a Saturday, et cetera. And that process was very manual and painful for employees. So our founders built a solution that not only schedules people and proactively puts people in a position to be first responders when something doesn't work, but as the world becomes more dependent on that technology in real time, really using machine signals to determine what's not working, why, get the right person on the right problem at the right time, which leverages machine learning as well, to make sure that we make the best use of our employees' time all the time, right? And that they are on the most important problems, the problems that are also having business impact. And that means you have to bring together the technical community and the business community. You have to teach the whole organization to think on behalf of the customer. And if you want to do that, then that user better love that experience. That UI is built for them to be able to see time to value in seconds and minutes, not hours and months and years. And then when teams use that kind of platform, you have to be able to demonstrate a value proposition to the company as well.
So we don't sell via credit card. We sell the enterprise and the enterprise deploy solutions that do notifications and integrate all that in. And I think that one thing that people don't want to do is they don't want to continue to swivel shit around between different apps. And there's lots of apps out there. There's lots of apps out there for notification and things happen in the enterprise. But I don't necessarily always want to go to a different interface for notifications and a different interface for HR and a different notification to find a security vulnerability. I want to be able to think of a common way, a common look and feel, a way that I can drive that experience in a uniform way. I'm an employee, and I know I have to remember now, how do I file an expense report again? And oh yeah, I have to go over here and get this device from somebody else, and it's an awkward experience inside the enterprise.
Which is why you need an interface that it automatically connects to the entire ecosystem out of the box. So PagerDuty is built to connect to 250 of the most popular tools, apps, and platforms on the planet. It's why you see it in the Okta report, and it's seamless. You don't need a systems integrator. You don't need a consultant. You just turn it on and go. And we do sell directly to enterprises as well. It's a big part of our business, but we're very popular with our users. And I think, I've been in this business for a long, long time. There are not a ton of enterprise companies that the users truly love, right? I'm in London in the tube with a PagerDuty backpack. We didn't even have people on the ground in that office. And 5 people came up to us in the tube over the course of the day, like, oh my God, PagerDuty's come to Europe. This is awesome. Because there's a personal value proposition that impacts the lifestyle of that person. People are nodding because a lot of you are PagerDuty customers, right? We integrate seamlessly to ServiceNow. We have a great relationship with ServiceNow. And so I think that consumers are demanding an experience that connects that ecosystem for them, as opposed to, leaving it up to the CIOs of the world to figure that out.
You think your name
So-
connects them back to the 80s, but I get you.
So all of you are high growth companies. The report segments between growth in customers, growth in users. To some extent, it depends on the app, right? G Suite is for broad use within the enterprise, whereas something might be more specialized. But when you build, design, go to market again, and you're expanding your product, how do you balance the need for growing more customers versus, same customers, but go deeper in them?
From our perspective, our mantra internally is we don't want to go off and win customers to replace customers that we lost. So our very first focus is on helping organizations be successful, not helping our salespeople sell to organizations, but actually helping organizations be successful. And if we do, then we keep those customers. So therefore, every customer that we win is additive on top of that. And so, within the last year, we got 4,000 new customers, but we are not nearly as proud of that as we are that we kept the 10,000 that we had before that. So we're entirely focused on that. But what that means is what you were saying a little bit earlier. Our focus on the customer means that we're focused on the people who are carrying the devices. What we do is we help deploy an Apple ecosystem. Well, very few organizations are as focused on that end individual, that end user as Apple is. So therefore, that's what we need to be focused on. And the end user doesn't demand security. They demand that they can do what they want when they want. So the trick is to be able to provide them with what they need, the apps that they need, the security that they need, but mostly the empowerment that they demand. Because back in the day, you're talking about 96, when I started in the workforce in 89, if the IT team would have came to me and said, hey, here's our security policy. We're going to handcuff you to the desk while you use your computer. I would have said, oh, okay, when are you going to unlock me? And I would have accepted it. People won't accept that anymore. They will leave and they'll go to another company. They need the experience and they want to be their best. And it's our job to be able to provide that.
Well, I mean, I think that, the question that you asked can be answered in a lot of different ways. I'm sure that whoever has the monopoly on selling mainframes to the federal government, they're not too worried about whether they're going to lose a customer and how much they're going to innovate. I mean, they are very focused on adding 0 customers and just making sure that they keep the existing customers, the federal government, happy and that nothing's going to swap out. I think if you look at the group that's up here and you look at the group that's in the application stacks that are out there today and in general in the business of work report and beyond that, right, it's a very heterogeneous environment. And so I think you have to walk and chew gum at the same time. I mean, you have to keep innovating for your customers, making them happy. And then you have to also keep thinking about what are the next problems that I'm going to help them solve so that I can broaden out not only the use cases, obviously, for my company so that we can extend that, but at the same time, it's going to add more value to what they're trying to do and find more opportunities to help your customers. So I don't think it's one or the other. Certainly, there's probably spectrums of that, and it's very important to make sure that your existing customers are happy, but you're never going to make everyone happy. If you have, congratulations. Let me know how you did that. So I think you have to kind of do both and think about what that balance is.
You have to find a way to delight both communities, right? Because then you're creating harmony and flow for those companies and getting work done.
We spend a lot of time thinking about innovation versus keeping the customers happy, and our focus is always on our customers first. but we also want to innovate. You know, we're a fast-growing, very innovative company. We've launched AI and ML products into the market already. It's not something that's coming. It's actually live and in production with our customers now. So we spend a lot of time thinking about how do we both drive innovation, but at the same time, making sure our customers are incredibly happy with our products and continue to use them, grow, and expand.
But our customers want us to innovate too.
They do.
So part of that innovation is for the customers that you already have. I'm sorry.
Agree. No, I agree.
So we're going to go to audience Q&A. So if you have a question, I don't know if there's microphones or just raise your hand.
Just yell
But
at
we're
us.
also, for the Q&A, we're going to invite back Todd, Diana, and Aaron. He's still here. And I'm going to do the first question, but as you guys take your seats.
Or stand.
Yeah, no, you guys, I think you're supposed to use, here, you take
Oh,
my
here.
chair.
No,
come on.
No, this is
You
the
wanted
moderator's chair.
it, you wanted it at the
You
beginning.
can sit here.
Okay, others.
I showered this morning.
So last year we thought the collaboration market was, maybe we could have thought that the collaboration market was settled. It was Slack, everybody's using Slack. The report this year shows tremendous competition there. Why? What's happening?
So do each of the 9 of us go and say
No.
I think we
Sorry,
go
Aaron.
1, 9, 2, 8.
I'll let 2 people answer and then we'll go to the audience. 2 people whoever wants to answer. Aaron, you do collaboration.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, cool. Oh, sorry. No, I just turned it off. So I was talking to myself. Hello. Okay. Hello. All right. So, why is it not settled?
Yeah.
I mean,
Right, and why is there so much competition all of a sudden?
I think we're, I don't know, I'm going to make up a number, 3 to 5% of the way into this entire market. So you have such a stale environment for a lot of focus on 1996 in the last panel, but for the past 20 or so years, you have a very stale environment in terms of how people got their work done, how they collaborated. You had, obviously products like Lotus and Outlook, and that was where the vast majority of collaboration happened. And so all of a sudden, with smartphones and what we've learned from the consumer internet, there's just this pent-up demand for, wow, there must be better ways to be able to share and work and get the information. And, there's maybe, like high single-digit millions or low tens of millions of people on the planet that are now using these types of tools in the workplace compared to the billions that could be. So we're just very early. And
So is the market wide open?
Massive. And there's no, I don't think we're 5 years from being able to claim who is going to be the winner. And in fact, I think it's probably a little bit reductive of us as an industry to think about it as a sort of winner type of model. This is a non-zero sum market where there's going to be 3 to 5 different ways that people are going to be using tools. Some will be broadcast, some will be team communication, some will be one-to-one messaging, some will be around content, some will be around channels. So there's just going to be a lot of different ways to work. And of course, it's going to make Diana's life, again, very complicated, but with Okta, it all makes sense. So that's the plan.
You can see it. You just call it job security. Questions? Yeah.
We heard from Diana about measuring like the boss from the 300 perspective, and I was wondering what other things have you been engaged with in terms of measuring employee well-being, experimenting with different techniques like management styles, workshops to cultivate more well-being and engagement?
I love that question. One of the things we're measuring is team health. So because we keep track of how employees respond to problems, their off-hour work time, their time under pressure when things are breaking. If you remember a couple of years ago when a large cloud provider went down and half of the world went dark because everything is hosted in the cloud now, and you couldn't watch Game of Thrones or something horrible like that happened. There's a bunch of engineers running around trying to minimize that disruption as quickly as they can, and that has a huge impact on their health at work, right? And it's a huge predictor of burnout, for instance, to understand how many people are working outside of hours, what kind of work they're doing, the diversity of the work that they're doing, et cetera. We can measure that because we see what they're working on, what their expertise is, where their time is spent, et cetera. And what we found is that the most productive teams are also the healthiest and happiest teams. And when a team is, heat mapped in the red, we can help customers figure out how to improve their scheduling, their automation, their workflows, even the way they drive expertise, in terms of teams across their organization to improve the overall health of the organization, right? And then you map that to something like Workday's engagement environment, and you get a very holistic view of the health of your employees. You also can see some competition, which teams are more productive and why. And so we have customers that use our analytics, for instance, to reward their most productive teams with the lowest mean time to resolve challenges with headcount first. So think about that for a minute. That's instead of the fat and happiest team that gets the least done, screams the loudest, gets headcount, the most productive, most capable, most efficient team gets headcount first, right? So it changes the dynamic of how you distribute resources.
And I think while employees are probably excited when they get shackled to their desks so they can use the laptops that are there or whatever it was you were using in '89, I guess the pen and paper. Sorry? There you go. I think today, the new generation that's coming in is also looking for a workplace where they're going to be excited about not only who they're working with, but what they're doing, and frankly, how that's part of the community. And, there was a question on the first panel a little bit about culture and about things that need to change in Silicon Valley. And I think when I looked up and down the panel very quickly, everyone here has what used to be called CSR or social responsibility. Now it's also known as social impact programs. And so things like, for example, Okta for Good, which is something that we inculcated very early in the company when we started. But when you're getting started, you're just trying to hit the next payroll, sell the first customers, do whatever you can. But you try and put that culture in there early so that if you're fortunate enough to become successful later on as a company, you can have programs where your employees can go and contribute in the community, where they can give to some of the causes that are important to them, where they can volunteer as team groups. And things like that are much more powerful than a lot of the other contrived tools around building team culture and building. When we look at the surveys of people who actually go and participate in things like some of the Okta for Good programs we just had in the holiday season, they're much prouder of where they work. They are much happier to work with their employees. And frankly, at the end of the day, you want just an environment where people are going to come and do their best work and all these kinds of things, but where they're happy to go do that. Because if not, they can go anywhere. And I think that's something that's kind of a new approach to life that maybe started, 10, 15 years ago even. But I think you're really starting to see some momentum there, and it's something, frankly, that I think that I am personally, and I know we are very proud of what we do at Okta, and I know a lot of the other folks on this panel are too. So,
Question over here.
Okay. There we go. Yeah. So I guess Todd and Freddie, my question would be, what was the biggest change in the report? This year, from this year to last year, and then other panelists, when they tell us what it is, you can tell us why or what's going on.
I think there was a few that caught my eye. The first, what's that? One. So, like I said, I think there were a few that caught my eye. And
he doesn't want to hear your whole speech.
So I'll talk about the few that I thought were interesting. And the first one I think is all just industries. You see more and more larger companies using the service, or using the services out there, which I think is interesting. And then I think we talked about the rise of security. You see security up there as, I don't remember what it was, but it was like 6 or 7. Well, now you can think about another one while I keep talking. It was 6 or 7 of the top 15 were security applications, were new approaches to security for an existing environment, or new approaches to security altogether. And I think that's something that you're going to see continue to accelerate. And it's like, okay, great. We can have all these applications. We can have best of breed. We can use all the functional point solutions. Now we need to tie them all together. We need to do that intelligently. Everyone has a chief security officer and a whole team around that. And I think there's a lot of innovation that's going to happen in that world to not only take advantage of what we have today, but also bring new technologies into the workplace.
I mean, the issue with security is not that there's security events. We know there's going to be security events. The question is, when it hits, what device do you have to patch now? Right? What do you have to fix now? We know Spectre's going to hit. We know Meltdown's going to hit. We know the next one's going to hit any minute, any hour, any day, right? Something's going to happen. The question then is, out of the dozens, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of devices that you manage, where do you go? What do you need to fix now versus what can be fixed, I don't know, maybe a couple of days from now? How do you think through that? And having this, right now, the poor vulnerability security team of seeing this threats and feeds and information coming at them and trying to find the proverbial needle in the haystack and then drive that resolution is something that is just really the key security thing we saw at the end of the day. We can give people lots of data. We can flood them with data. You know, we can flood them with data all day long, but it doesn't really do anything. We know we got hit by, like everyone else did, with an Intel processor with the latest bug, right? The question then was, which boxes do I go deal with now? Which ones are going to affect my customers today? Probably don't have to upgrade my laptop. I'll just turn that thing off and I won't be affected for a while. But I'm going to go fix, you know, the
That's
thing
why you're not
running.
emailing me back.
Exactly right. No, that's a different
I was
reason.
waiting for you.
But I mean, that's really sort of the key for me is security is a very big movement, but really finding those vulnerabilities, because when those events occur, as we were saying earlier, we need to react quickly and we need to react at the right type of devices and the right portions of our business now.
I'll give you one that's buried in the report a little bit, and that is, you know, Jamf was Okta's #1 growing app. What does that mean, since all we do is deploy Apple in the enterprise? What does that mean? It's hot out there right now. Apple's growth within the enterprise is unbelievable right now. And because and it isn't like we're a young upstart. We've been around for 15 years now, and we have 14,000 customers. So the fact that we're the highest growing on the list after this long is saying something's happening with Apple in the enterprise. And I think the story behind that is everything we started this panel discussing, and that is the consumerization of IT, that employees want choice in what they use, and at one point in time, the only way they could get choice was to bring their own device. That's actually being left behind now as corporations are starting to say, okay, well, we'll let you use what you want to use. What do you want to use? And they're choosing Apple. And as a result, Jamf, to a large extent, is riding that.
And I think you're going to see more solutions like Jamf that improve the experience for employees. So our employees, when they onboard into PagerDuty, we're a happy Jamf customer. They often comment about how quickly they're up and running. They get to pick their device in the onboarding process before they finish their second day of orientation. They're set up with every tool solution they need with the help of Jamf and Okta and a number of our partners. And that instant gratification is not a perk, that's an expectation. It's a core level expectation. I should just get here and I should be ready to go immediately, and it should be easy and it should be customized for me. Like imagine that 10 years ago trying to do that, right? So I think we also expect more interoperability with everything that we do. And the other thing I noticed in the report was the consumer applications. People are booking their travel, they're booking restaurants, they're making reservations, they're doing their banking, they're living at work, right? And we can't try and artificially separate those things anymore, because particularly if you have a young employee base where everything just happens instantly and quickly. And so I think just that the meshing of those two worlds is not something that we can ignore.
Okay. Question back there, or whoever has the microphone.
Yeah, hi. I was curious, what's the most surprising finding from the report, maybe from some of the panels? And as you think about this spectrum of, you know, more features, more consumerization, but also a desire for more control and security, as you think about your own roadmaps, how does that, you know, actually change the way that you're thinking about your business?
Remember, there are two different audiences. They're looking. IT wants control and security. The users want complete empowerment, freedom, and privacy. And the trick of what's happening in the market right now is, you know, bringing together these two completely separate demands into a solution. And doggone it, if organizations aren't finding it, the fact that you can now, you know, talk about employee onboarding. Many of our customers, and I'm sure you were one of them, they don't even have the meeting of IT and the employee on the first day. They're shipping a shrink-wrap computer to the employee's home ahead of time, saying, welcome to the company, power it on, and during the first power on, it's getting secured, it's getting all the apps loaded, it's getting everything that is needed to start their job, and yet it feels like they got a Christmas present. It feels like they got a consumer gift. And that's actually being pulled off today.
Make sure you get the address right.
Yeah, get the address right.
Make sure they turn up for their start date.
Yeah. But it's secured the moment that even if you shipped it to the wrong person, it would be useless. Because of the way that we've got these, and all of us together really, have got these secured today, and the onboarding process, again, it feels like a consumer moment, but yet it has every bit as much of security and safety and privacy that we delivered when we were just trying to secure the network. Because the perimeter is no longer the network. The perimeter is the person. And you need to secure around that person.
And the upside is you get a couple weeks of free work from people. So that's great.
There you go.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
All right, we're out of time. Out of time. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, what a wonderful panel. I thought it was very interesting to hear about, of course, the importance of personalization and how that's not only as companies are thinking about building that into their apps and services, but also thinking about how important it is for the employee and the modern worker. So the team really teed it up for our next section. We're going to be talking about security. So as we talked about at the beginning, security was definitely a big part of our report this year. We not only dug into some analysis around the top performing apps and the fastest apps. So there were 7 of the top 15 fastest growing apps were around security. We also looked at some additional information around threat intelligence and MFA password policy and MFA and password policies that our customers are employing. So today we're going to have a conversation with a couple of folks who are going to dive into a little bit more around security. So I'm pleased to introduce you to Enrique Alvarez. As they're getting mic'd up, they'll be joining us in just a quick minute. But we have a great team here today for this section on security, so I think you guys will really enjoy the conversation. We have Enrique Alvarez. He is the Supervisory Special Agent of the FBI in the San Francisco branch. And we also have Okta's very own Chief Security Officer, Yasir Obusalhem. And he and his team really helped us compare and prepare a lot of the information and all of the analysis that we have in the report around security. So I know that they're going to go through a lot of great information and details for you guys just as soon as they get mic'd up. All right, please join me in welcoming Enrique and Yasir.
All right, good morning. Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Yasir Obusalhem. I'm the Chief Security Officer at Okta, and I'm pleased to be joined by Enrique Alvarez, who's the Supervisory Special Agent at the FBI branch here, who heads the Cyber Squad and the local office. So I guess to just set the stage, Enrique, can you tell us a little bit about the kind of work that your team does and specifically some of the initiatives that you work on for the FBI?
Sure. It's great to be here. The FBI, every FBI field office has at least one cyber squad. San Francisco field office here has 4 operational squads, and what we do is we investigate instances of cyber intrusion. We have one dedicated criminal squad down in San Jose. All they look at are the sort of criminal actions that we see. We have 3 squads, including my own in Oakland, where we are dedicated to looking at state-sponsored intrusion.
Very nice. So let's talk a little bit about the threat landscape. You know, when we go through the headlines these days, Russia and China seem to come back pretty much on a daily basis when it comes to cyber attacks. And then when we did our own analysis, what we find is that the attacks that we see against the Okta ecosystem tend to have some concentration in China, but also we see attacks from the US, from Russia, from Europe, and so on. I guess, what does that tell us about the new threat landscape? Who's doing these attacks?
So you have a wide variety of malicious cyber actors, we like to call them. Certainly, a lot of them are in China. But my own back of the envelope Google search when we started today's panel was, last time we checked, there's 340 million IP addresses, assigned to China, right? So it's not surprising that in your report you're seeing a lot of that happening. However, the level of sophistication and the manner in which cyber intrusion is sort of conducted based on the casework that we have is that you're never going to see that attacking IP address is not going to be directly associated with where that actor is, right? They're going to have layers of infrastructure that they're going to be sort of conducting their activity through. So you could have a state-sponsored Iranian actor using infrastructure in Ohio, for example, trying to attack you. And sort of the challenge as a net defender is understanding, hey, is that a friendly IP or a malicious IP?
Very nice. And so I guess let's zoom in on that a little bit. Can you categorize for us the types of attackers that you guys see? And this is kind of from an attribution perspective, which I know that your team works on. And really, what are these attackers after?
So, as you said in the report, you're seeing the threat coming from everywhere. The attackers are interested in everything, right? We talk about sort of the state-sponsored actors on one end of the scale with the highest level of sophistication are after your intellectual property. They're after what makes you special. That's especially true with the Chinese threat. Their viewpoint is really it's easier to steal than to innovate, right? But you have also very sophisticated non-state sponsored actors, criminal enterprises, if you will. They're almost function like companies and almost like Amazon on the dark web, complete with areas where you can give feedback, where they compete for favorable ratings. They have HR people, they have people that are writing exploit kits, and you can get up and running very quickly on the dark web as a rather sophisticated set of techniques. They just provide it almost as a business as a service in that regard. And then at the very low end, you have hacktivists, you have script kiddies, you have folks that are exploring capability. They are after basically disruption, right? They want to disrupt things. Maybe they have a social message, but really, if you're a medium-sized company, you really want to protect what makes that company special, especially when you're competing against so many other similar companies. So that intellectual property is sometimes what they're after.
Interesting. So I guess one of the takeaways from the reports is that some of these attacks, in fact, the second rank in terms of where these attacks are coming from is being attributed to the US, at least IPs that are geolocated in the US. I guess what does that tell us in terms of the attackers using IPs maybe in the geography where they're located or somewhere else?
So we see the trend is to use infrastructure that is nowhere near associated with where you physically are located, right? And the state-sponsored guys were doing that a long time ago, but now we start seeing that technique being utilized by these sort of more sophisticated criminal enterprise groups. It's relatively easy to get a virtual private server. It's relatively easy using a stolen credit card to sort of establish your set of infrastructure. You can burn that infrastructure if you want. So I'm not surprised to see that maybe the second ranked country in your report was US IPs. It's not surprising to me because we see that in our casework. A dedicated malicious cyber actor is going to take the time to spread out his infrastructure in as many places as possible. They're going to write malware that's going to utilize sort of DNS-based calls as opposed to hard-coded IPs. So that gives them the flexibility to use things like DNS fast fluxing to kind of move their infrastructure around. So if you're a net defender, I go out to you on in terms of I feel your pain, right? If CSOs, CISOs have to defend against everything practically, and it sounds like a very daunting practice, but there are some techniques you can use to kind of help mitigate that threat.
Okay, so I guess that's a good segue into the next section here of this debate, of this part chat, which is, let's talk about the defender's perspective. So one of the takeaways from our reports is that when users are given the choice, they tend to choose shorter passwords, passwords that would not necessarily be able to protect the enterprise assets. One thing that I want to mention here is that some of the sources that we use to conduct our analysis are passwords that were breached in the context of consumer apps, right? So this is not the enterprise setting. But even with that, what we found is that less than 4% of these passwords actually comply with what we would consider as kind of the average password across the Okta ecosystem. The second takeaway was that even when you think you have a good password policy, there's a couple of things that needs to be taken into consideration. One is that attackers, they don't necessarily try every combination of what we call the key space, which would take essentially centuries to complete. Instead, they have some sophisticated techniques that they use. And also, when I guess all fails, what they rely on is phishing and spear phishing. I guess, what can you tell us in terms of your experience on controls that enterprises use to protect their data, whether it's credentials or everything else?
So we see that in terms of tactics, techniques, and procedures that a lot of these malicious cyber actors are using, they're looking for the low-hanging fruit, right? So if you have at your enterprise no password policy, right? You can have a password that's 2 or 3 digits or 3 characters long. That's certainly going to be low-hanging fruit for these actors. They are looking for easy ways to get into the enterprise, but we see and we read and we hear about sort of these very sophisticated techniques that they're using, custom malware, zero-day attacks. In the casework that we are looking at across the country, we see actually time and again their go-to technique is still spear phishing, right? If you're a net defender, you have to be right 100% of the time, but if you're a malicious actor, you just have to be right once. What we see layered on top of that and sort of is more sophisticated reconnaissance ahead of that spear phishing, right? They're looking at your Twitter feed, they're looking at your Facebook account, they're looking at your LinkedIn, or maybe they're already connected with you on LinkedIn or some other social media platform, and they're going to look to see what kind of a person you are. They tend to target the C-suite only because the C-suite is moving fast. They want quick access to their networks. Sometimes if there is a good password policy or a connection policy, they want to be exempted from that, right? So it doesn't happen all the time, but we see increasingly these actors going after the C-suite precisely because they know that these folks want to connect quickly and they may not be following that same policy.
That's great. I guess one thing that we had as a takeaway also from this discussion around password is that multi-factor authentication seems to be a must-have these days. So even if you have a strong password policy, even if you do training and so on, if you don't enforce multi-factor authentication, then it's just about a matter of time before one of your or more of your users get compromised. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about how companies can interact and collaborate with the FBI. And there's obviously a lot of myths. I'd love to get your perspective, and maybe you can tell us about how you collaborate with companies. I know that we've collaborated now. This is my second role where we have a very tight collaboration. And I guess if you could talk about your interaction with folks that you are building your network here locally, and also when companies should call on the FBI or law enforcement in general to be involved.
Right. I joke around that it's, in this day and age, the most likely FBI agent that you're going to meet is probably working cyber. And that's only because cyber division at our headquarters in Washington has really made it a priority for us to get out and talk to the public and private sector as much as possible. The FBI shares indicators of compromise through sort of a public-private sort of partnership. We have a program called InfraGuard where we encourage folks to join, and it's sort of a way to sort of discuss some of the security issues. But we really are invested in trying to communicate as much as we can with the private sector prior to a breach occurring. And we share sort of the tactics, the techniques, and the procedures that we see these malicious actors using. We try to tell people about that as much as we can. We would rather make the private sector a much harder target and not have to investigate instances of computer intrusion than going in and afterwards. We'd rather prevent the homicide than investigate the homicide, right? To use a street cop analogy. And the idea about if you have that relationship with your local sort of FBI cyber squad or cyber supervisor like myself, it sort of demystifies the process. Contrary to popular belief, we're not going to show up in raid jackets and seize servers and things like that. We'll show up with plaid shirts and jeans and backpacks and try to work with you after that compromise has occurred. We won't be able to assist that victim company with remediation, right? That's going to be a path that that every company is going to take, and sometimes they bring in a third party, or sometimes they do it themselves. But we'll work right along that process very tightly. Our priority in those formative stages of an investigation after an intrusion has occurred is we want to find out who did it. We want to find attribution. And we will share that data with that victim company along every step of the way. When it's appropriate for that victim company to make an announcement, that's great, but we would not necessarily do that. We're very invested in trying to figure out who's doing the intrusion, and if it's a state-sponsored actor, we're going to sort of really engage with that victim company C-suite to make them a harder target at that point.
Fantastic. Well, Enrique, thanks so much for joining us. Always a pleasure to hear your perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, that wraps up our event for the day. Hope that you found all the different insights and takeaways to be interesting. A couple highlights for me, really learning more about how not just enterprises are thinking about personalizing their experiences, but also about how technology companies are thinking about creating, positive work environments and delivering laptops on day one for their employees as part of that. And of course, we also learned that, MFA is an absolute must, regardless of your password policies. But so many more takeaways throughout the day. Please join me in giving all of our panelists a warm round of applause for their participation. And thank you. And as we wrap up today, we just invite you to continue to network. We also do have copies of the printed Businesses at Work report for you to take a look at. And of course, they're also available online. But again, thank you so much for taking your morning to be with us. And we hope that you enjoyed the event. Thank you.